Age, Iron Age, Bronze Age, Prehistory, Lesson 5, where we have been charting the development of humans through the Stone Age all the way to the Iron Age. And so this is our last session. I'm not going to tell you actually what we're going to do straight away, because then that might give the answer to our very first activity. But hello to everybody who is watching us live, everybody who is watching us on catch up, because what we're going to start with, and I'm going to turn my camera off actually so that you can see this better, is we're going to try and solve a mystery. And we're still in the Iron Age, which is what we were looking at last week. But Britain in the Iron Age is known for the development of iron, that's obvious, but it's also known for something else. It's not only the development of iron that makes the Iron Age so famous. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some pictures of what we're going to look at today. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about what you can see, first of all. That's the most obvious one. So it doesn't matter at what level you do history, even if you're all the way up to degree level, when you look at a source, you think, well, what can I see or what can I read? What's it saying? What can I see in this instance? The first thing I want you to do then is thinking about what can you see? The second thing is there any similarities that you can see? So what can you see, including the similarities? The next thing is what can you infer? What can you learn? What can you judge? What do you think is happening? What can you actually see? Because if you look at the picture here, you could say, well, I can see some fields. But actually, if you look a bit closer, what can you learn about those fields from looking at them a bit closer? And then the last thing is, can you solve the mystery? What do you think these pictures are of? So what can you see, including similarities? What can you learn? What do you think it is that you can learn from these pictures? And can you solve the mystery? Now, obviously, these are more modern day pictures. In the Iron Age, you wouldn't have those houses behind the shot. But regardless, this is, we're looking at the field section. Think about what you can see. What do you think you can learn? What do you think it might be? I can see some similarities here. You can see some more similarities. So hopefully what you've worked out is that we're going to be looking at Hillforts. And so what you should have seen from all of these pictures is that they are all obviously on high ground. Most of them, it looks quite obvious. You can see these almost slices. That's another similarity. You can see paths in this one, which is quite unusual. And so this is well done if you solve the mystery, because this is what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at Hillforts. And it's something that started to be built in the Iron Age. And we're going to think about why. Why did people in the Iron Age build Hillforts? What was the reason? There's lots of reasons, but why did they do it? Why did they not do it in the Bronze Age or the Stone Age? Why all of a sudden in the Iron Age do we have the building of Hillforts? Now, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to imagine you're the head of a Celtic tribe and you're looking to create your settlement. So you can give yourself a tribal name. So mine, I'm the head of the Chrissy tribe. I'm going to settle somewhere. But what do you think I need to consider when I settle? What do you think I need to consider when I'm going to settle my people somewhere? Let's have a little think. So we're all, obviously it's a settled tribe. So I'm going to need to make sure that there's somewhere good to grow my crops There's no place good settling somewhere if the soil's no good, if it's full of clay, if it gets waterlogged, if it's right next to an area that gets so exposed that it's so windy and cold. So I'm going to have to find somewhere that I can grow good crops. What else am I going to have to think about? Well, I'm going to need to settle somewhere near a woodland, because I'm going to probably need the wood to build my settlement and wood for fuel. So I don't know if you've got that one right. I'm going to need to potentially be near some sources of animals that maybe I could domesticate. I'd need to be near some water. That's probably the most important thing. I'd need to be near some water. So there's lots of things that you need to think about when you're settling. You also need to think about somewhere that's safe, where you can see all around you, a little bit like this settlement, so that you can see if people coming are friendly or whether those people are not friendly. Lots of things to consider. Now, in the Iron Age, what becomes very, very common are settlements called Hillforts. This is a picture of Danebury Hill, and you can see this sort of settlement here. Just turn my camera off again. So you can see that there's some flat land here, and it's at the top of a hill. So you can see a drawing and then an actual aerial photograph. And so this settlement at the top of a hill on a bit of flat land, we call them Hillforts, and they become far more common in the Iron Age. So you can see, you know, there's path through the hill. Now, why? Well, it's thought that actually, originally, well, we don't really know, but the thought is that Hillforts were originally built to store grain. So the settlements would have extended past that hill fort, but that it was a place for you to store grain or protect your animals from wild animals. And so really these first settlements on the top of the hill were really just sort of small farms in order to just house your grain or protect your animals. No one really knows, but that's the kind of first theory. And so the theory is you'd get to your bit of high ground on your settlement, and you dig a really big pit in the ground. And then once you'd grown your grain, your wheat or your barley or whatever it is that you're growing crops-wise, and you've harvested that grain, you would take it to this hill fort. You would have a big pit that you dug, and then you would store your grain there to keep it safe from the elements, to stop anybody stealing it. And then you would use a winch. It looks a bit like a well, doesn't it? But you would use a winch. So you'd, turn your stick, and it would get, it would scoop up if you had a bucket or a pot of some description, and you would be able to get out your grain. Now, obviously, people are building round houses at this sort of time. So I think we saw this picture maybe last week of people building more settlements. And so then the Iron Age people evolve. They evolve from using these Iron Age hill forts just to store grain. And then they decide that actually they're going to build significantly bigger hill forts and settle within a hill fort. Well, why? Why bother? Why would you can see here it's different, isn't it? We've got this hill fort, got a wall around it. Why do you think you would bother? Why bother? Because some hill forts become absolutely massive hill forts. So they become huge permanent settlements. So why? Well, safety is the biggest one. So this is an example of a hill fort. Can you see that there's actually several walls almost around it, several walls with the little grain store right at the top? And the reason behind this is mainly safety, because if you're at the top of a hill and you look out, you can see everybody coming. And that therefore suggests that during this period of time, we know there's lots of Celtic tribes around, and we know at this period of time that it wasn't one unified nation, and therefore it suggests that there is lots and lots of disagreement or even wars between the Celtic tribes. And therefore it's a logical conclusion for you to develop and for you to have that actually, rather than just protecting our grain at the top of a hill fort, and nobody really knows why they started this, but actually why don't we have our whole settlement within a hill fort? So I don't know why this thing isn't going away. But is there disadvantages to living in a hill fort? Well, absolutely. If you're going to choose a place due to its high ground, there potentially is no water supply. And although you're protected in your hill fort, the disadvantage is if you're surrounded by enemies, you could, in theory, be trapped inside. So it's not a perfect solution, but it's something that we start to see, these armoured hill forts being built in the Iron Age. And so we're seeing yet again this evolution of thought and this evolution of human ideas. Now, why is it a good idea to build on top of a hill? Well, it definitely is that protection element. And you can see that from this photograph here. If you look here, you can see all the surrounding areas around you. So it's really, really a very, very good idea. It's really easy to defend, because if your grain is all stolen, then you're all going to starve. So it's a really, really good idea. Now, this is an example of a huge Iron Age settlement. It's known as Maiden Castle, but it's an example of one. They wouldn't have used the term castle in those days, but it's one of the largest hill forts in Britain. And this is the example here. This is a drawing of it, but this is an example here of an Iron Age hill fort. So what do you notice about the hill fort? What do you notice about it? We can see lots of settlements, obviously. You can see lots of roundhouses. But what else can you see? What other features does it have? And important features which would make it harder to attack if you were not like a warring tribe. Well, the people designed their houses for safety. You should have picked out the large gates. So you've got your roundhouses, but you've also got the start of what we would call today city gates. We've got large gates that you can close. The other thing that we noticed in those pictures at the beginning, and we keep seeing, are these huge ditches that are built. It's not as easy as running up a hill. If you've dug in these layers, these ditches, it makes it incredibly harder, much harder to attack. And then as you're digging, if you heap the earth into steep banks, earth banks, or sometimes they're known as ramparts, it again makes it harder, because it's not the case of just running up a hill. If you've dug in these ditches and then you've used that soil to bank up an earth bank, it actually makes it incredibly tricky to attack. And often there's evidence, archaeological evidence, of kind of wooden fencing as well. Okay, wooden fencing. So can you see now, if we look back at this picture, you can see the ditches and the steep banks. So this isn't a natural phenomenon. This has been man-made. So you choose the geographical location of the hill, but this is actually man-made, where you dig the ditches and use the soil up on the bank. So go and have a look if you've got any Iron Age settlements near you, because if you ever travel around and you see something like that, you know it's an Iron Age hill fort. And so these are possibly what the entrance gates might have looked at. But the other thing that I really, really, really like is if you look at the roads. So if you look at the road here into the hill fort, it actually is a really, really good example of another technique. Can you look at the road and can you see it's not exactly straight, is it? It's called a dog leg. I don't know why it's called a dog leg, because my dogs don't look like that. But it's called a dog leg. And it's called a dog leg for a particular reason. This is the thing I find the most amazing about Iron Age Hillforts. I'm going to give you 20 seconds to look at this and think, why did they make entrances like this? What do we think? Well, it's a protection thing as well, because if you've got a sharp bend as you're trying to enter into a hill fort, it actually makes it really difficult for attackers because you can't quite see round the corner. So if you build up the bank and you dig out this road, then what happens is it makes it really hard to know what's waiting around the corner. Obviously, if you're defending your hill fort, you absolutely know because you're on the high ground. But a really, really clever way of building a settlement. And I think what this shows us is how developed we start to become. So we know that many ancient Britons lived in these walled or fenced settlements. So this is another picture of that Butser farm, which I really like. In Scotland, they did something very similar, but they built crannogs, which are dwellings that are kind of built on stilts. So again, you still have that kind of high ground. And we know that they were built all around Britain. The estimation is about 4,000 hill forts across the United Kingdom and Ireland. So there is definitely going to be some near to you, so go and check them out. Now, during the Iron Age, more and more people migrated to Britain from Europe and the population grew. And we looked at this map last time of all the different Celtic tribes. And so, as I said, they often battled each other and raided each other's territory. And what did they want? Well, they probably wanted to take people's farmland, to take people's natural resources, because an increased population meant that there was definitely more competition for good farmland and natural resources. And so what we have in the Iron Age is this development of more aggressive and kind of warring tribes where people are competing for the best land and for the best materials. And so the Celts were supposed to be fearless warriors. If you've done the Romans, you might remember when we looked at people like Boudicca. They had long swords and spears, so weaponry had developed with the birth of iron. And early evidence suggests they lightened their hair with lime and stiffened it into spikes. And some evidence suggests, and we've got a lot of the Romans to say for this, so we do need to take some of it with a pinch of salt because they didn't really like the Celts. But some warriors even fought naked, and they would paint their bodies with blue woad. So why do you think they did these things? Why do you think they did these things? Probably, what do you think? To look scary. They definitely would have looked scary, and they would have had big weapons or big tools. Now, what weapon or tool would you use? Would you use a big sword? Would you have a big shield? Would you have a big staff? Well, one particular weapon was deemed to be the most popular way to defend a hill fort, and it's a slingshot. So how does a slingshot work? Looking at this picture, I'm sure it's a very simple thing. I'm sure you've worked it out, but you have two bits of thread and then a bit of usually animal skin, and then you have some big stones and you hold onto the string and you can fling it at people. And if you imagine running up a hill fort and you have big rocks or big heavy stones being slammed down on you, it would be an amazingly good weapon to use. And so we found thousands of slingshots in the ditches surrounding Iron Age Hillforts. And so it's an incredibly interesting thing that we think of, you know, these big Iron Age swords and these big, shields and all of these things, but actually one of the most popular things was actually a slingshot. Now, what I'm going to leave you with to think about is looking back at all of this 5 weeks, what do you think was the most significant development? What do you think was the most significant development in the Stone Age? What do you think was the most significant development in the Bronze Age? What do you think was the most significant development in the Iron Age? And then you could then get that even further. Out of all of those periods of time, the Stone, the Bronze, the Iron Age, which out of all of those did you think saw the most significant development? Was it those very first tools in the Stone Age? Was it the development of roundhouses and permanent settlements? Was it the development of hill forts? Was it the development of iron or even bronze? What do you think was the most significant development? And could you maybe make a really nice poster explaining or proving or trying to encourage me to believe that your interpretation is the correct interpretation? What you can also do if you wanted to is you could go and download this Iron Age activity sheet, and you could look at the Iron Age artifacts resource sheet and look further at Iron Age hill forts. And that is pretty much it from me. Live lessons and workshops are coming. We'll be back the week commencing the 1st of May. So we're going to be taking a 2-week break for Easter. And then the week after we come back from Easter, we're going to have just a couple of sort of standalone live sessions, because we're all gearing up for our Home Ed conference the week commencing the 24th to 28th of April. Now, there's loads of workshops for adults, but there's also lots of workshops for young people. So that's why we're not starting our live lessons and workshops back until the 1st of May, because you can find it in the copy above or below. Go and see what we've got going on for young people, and you can book yourselves onto those. And we will be back with our live sessions the week commencing the 1st of May. So have a lovely Easter. If you do any of that work on the Iron Age, or you make me that poster to convince me what you think is the most important development, then do go and share it with me, because I'd love to see it. Have a great Easter, and I'll see you soon.